Working class voters are mad about student debt relief. I've been doing these videos about how the Democrats lost the working class in the recent elections and what they could do to bring back the working class voter into their tent. One thing I hear a lot about is Biden's student debt relief plan. So let's talk about the problem, Biden's solution, and kind of where people fall on this. And I want to share my take as well. The total amount of United States student debt is over $1.7 trillion as of 2024. $1.7 trillion. More than 43 million Americans have student debt. The average borrower, $30,000 for a bachelor's degree, and somewhere between $70,000 and $200,000 for graduate degrees. Obviously, it varies by professional. 1 in 10 borrowers are in default, meaning they haven't made payments in over 270 days, and interest continues to compound for these borrowers. It's the one debt that you cannot default on, and it carries with you indefinitely for your entire life. So who's it mostly affect? Mostly Millennials and Gen Z. These generations have the highest level of student debt burdens. They're also facing rising housing costs, healthcare costs, education costs, and wage stagnation. It also affects low-income students, obviously disproportionately, and minority borrowers. Black students in particular borrow more and take longer to pay off their student debt due to the racial wealth gap. Graduate students and professionals also often take off the highest amount of student debt. So consider like a doctor who would take on six-figure debt in order to get their degree. So why has it become such a problem? The number one reason it's become a problem is that tuition continues to rise year after year. Since the 80s, college debt has increased faster than the rate of wages and the rate of inflation. State funding, meanwhile, has declined, and so they're pushing those costs from state universities and state colleges onto the students. Students have also faced easy access to federal loans. The federal government will lend money to just about anybody, regardless of what degree they're getting and their ability to pay in the future. So colleges, therefore, have no incentive to lower costs since students will borrow larger sums of money. We've also seen an increase, especially in the last 20 years, in predatory and for-profit colleges that mislead students about job prospects and salary potentials, and that has been a particularly bad part of the student loan debt crisis. Interest rates and loan services are becoming huge businesses as interest accrues faster than their ability to pay. And these students, after graduating or not graduating, get more and more debt as the years go on and their inability to pay. The Biden administration in 2022 put together a student loan forgiveness plan that would cancel up to $10,000 in federal student loans if you made less than $125,000 a year. Pell Grants, you got an additional $10,000 in forgiveness, and it was struck down by the Supreme Court. The Biden administration ended up forgiving about $189 billion through other programs that was not struck down by the court. And then they came up with other plans, but it was not implemented. Ultimately, for Biden, this was a failure. It was one of his promises that he was unable to keep, but nonetheless made a lot of working class voters very upset. So what are the pros and cons of student debt forgiveness? Why should the government forgive the debt that over 43 million Americans have? Well, the benefits. First, it would be an economic boost. People would get money, would be able to hold on to their disposable income, spend it on homes, cars, investments, stimulate the economy, local shops, whatever people spend money on. Young adults, and particularly millennials, would be able to do the life events that they've been long delaying, like homeownership or getting married or starting businesses or have kids. Things that they put off because of their student debt, they would start to do. These students and graduates who have debt, these debtors, they would, many of them who have been trapped in debt for decades, because of these high interest payments, high interest loans, would be able to do other things and would have that financial relief and stability to stimulate the economy by starting a business or do other things. It would also address inequality, as Black Americans and minority Americans and low-income Americans tend to have higher levels of debt. Now, why was there political backlash? What are the cons to this program? First, it's perceived as pretty unfair. Many working-class Americans didn't go to college. And so why should people who did go to college get this free ride from the government, this debt that was forgiven? They view this as an elitist policy that benefits the upper or upper middle class at their expense. Others feel like it's unfair because they paid off their student debts. Imagine that you just paid off your student debt in 2021, and then in 2022, that the Biden administration forgives debt for other people. That's unfair to you. Also, there's people who, instead of taking out debt to go to college, they took out debt to start a business. That debt is certainly not forgiven. So why should we pick and choose which debtors get forgiven by the federal government? There's also a moral hazard when forgiving debt. Ultimately, the rising cost of college will not change. So if universities continue to have increased their expenses and debtors get forgiven of their loans, there's very little incentive for colleges and universities to reduce their costs in the future. It also makes it seem like irresponsible borrowers got off without much penalty. There's also economic reasons for it. It shifts the financial burden from the debtor to the taxpayer, and all of this increased flow of money from the government into people's pockets through this forgiveness could lead to more inflation. So those are the pros and the cons. Here's my take. I come down on the side of forgiving the loans. Is it fair? No. But fairness is not a consistently applied aspect in our economic system. We bailed out Wall Street. That wasn't fair. We give tax breaks to high net wealth individuals and big corporations. That's not fair. If we're willing to support billion-dollar institutions when they're in trouble, we should be able to do that and extend that same compassion to everyday people. Many of these borrowers took on debt believing that a higher education would lead to upward mobility. It's not their fault they entered a job market with stagnant wages and rising living costs. So it's not just a financial issue, but it's also a moral issue. We should be encouraging people to get higher levels of education. That said, student debt forgiveness can't be a one-time band-aid. If we wipe out the student debt but do nothing about the rising cost of college, we'll be in the same place in 10 years from now. So I think we need a dual-track solution here. We need relief for current borrowers who are drowning in debt. We also need structural reform to make college more affordable and accountable going forward. These colleges can't keep increasing their prices every year. It's not right to the next generation who's trying to get a decent education. This could mean tuition caps or expanded trade schools and apprenticeship programs, something I'm very passionate about, as alternatives to traditional college and university in order to reduce the price with competition. Requiring colleges to share in the risk of loan repayment if the students can't find decent jobs. It should be on the colleges to help facilitate their students getting decent paying jobs when they graduate. And if they can't, they should have some skin in the game for these very high loans. We need more transparent data on job outcomes by major and by degree and by school. In short, debt relief, it's not a perfect policy. I think it's necessary. I think that we need a dual-track solution here. Relief for current borrowers and try to bring down the cost of college.